Hello everybody, I'm having another video today. Still home alone, get to make these videos today. So the one I wanted to talk about today was Donald Trump's promise to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Now, a lot of people have said, certainly on his opposition, but even people, other Republicans have said this is ridiculous, it can't be done. So I wanted to look at whether it can be done. Well, first of all, what is it? Whether it can be done and whether he's actually going to do it and whether it'll literally be 24 hours and when he'll start and so forth. So, first thing to know is this is quite speculative because Trump has not announced how he's going to do it. Now, why he hasn't should be fairly obvious because he needs to meet with Zelensky and Putin and work it out. And if he announces it, then and they have other ideas, then it won't work. So he hasn't announced it. It could also be, of course, that he's just making the whole thing up. Now, as for whether he's making the whole thing up, I'll note that Zelensky and Ukraine are taking it seriously. And there have been a lot of panics that they believe that Trump or USA under Trump will simply abandon them, stop funding their war, and they will lose and lose everything and lose their entire country. So they're taking it seriously. But they petitioned heavily for Trump to lose the election. They tried their very best to engage in election interference. I don't know how successful they were, but I know that they were trying to. Now, Russia, for their part, have actually tailored their military operations around Trump getting elected and when that happens. Now, of course, he won the election. That was November 4th, I think, November 5th. And but he won't come into power until 20th of January. So they have 2 months now of a bit of uncertainty. And we also know that Joe Biden, just a couple of days ago, authorised for Ukraine to get American long range missiles and authorised for them to be used in Russia. Now, Russia said that will mean that they consider they're in a direct war with USA, but we also have to tailor that by the fact that then Trump didn't authorise that and Trump's going to come into power, so it might not happen. But certainly, I think that Ukraine shouldn't use those missiles, at least not in Russia. They could use them within Ukraine and fire on Russian targets, for example, in the Donbass, but they shouldn't be using them in Russia because that would weaken their position. But then again, that maybe they should. I'd be very cautious if I was them about using them. I think they should think very carefully about it. So, firstly, so it does seem as if they're taking it seriously. And we also know a lot of Americans are taking it seriously. A lot of American political and military figures are taking it very seriously, and figures around the world. World leaders are considering that this is real. Now, that doesn't guarantee it'll definitely happen. Doesn't even guarantee that Trump will actually go ahead with it. But it does mean this is a serious thing. And in other words, it is plausible. Now, whether it's literally going to be 24 hours and whether it's literally going to be day one, that's a different issue. So, one reason why it might not be day one is because he just announced yesterday, I think, maybe today, I'm not sure of the timelines, but certainly recently that on day one he's going to mass deport illegal immigrants. If he's doing that on day one, he's not doing this on day one. You can't do both on day one. I run out of resources, you run out of time. So, how long would that take? Maybe a month. So that pushes this back to late February, maybe even March, and maybe later than that. And it could be that he doesn't have this summit for some time. That would then be up to Russia and Ukraine, not just Zelensky and Putin, but any other diplomats and envoys and all that sort of thing, to sort of pressure him to, hey, we want this to happen. So I think that they will end up pressuring him, and then that'll happen when it happens. And I don't think it'll happen on January 20th or 21st. I think it'll happen sometime later. Now, can it literally happen in 24 hours? And so I look at what a lot of people have suggested, and they've said, well, it can happen in 24 hours if only if Trump just says to Russia, look, we're not going to fund Ukraine anymore. You can have all of Ukraine. So I wanted to look at that option first. So is that something that will be supported? Now, of course, Trump has the majority in both the House and the Senate. So as long as they vote on party lines, he can do anything. But would they support that? And I think it would make Russia too powerful. It would also damage their relationship with Ukraine so much that it would also make America look like the bad guys in the whole of Europe and damage their relationship with NATO, with the European Union. Basically, put a big target on USA's back. So I think even if he did get approval to do it, and I think some of the people in his team would not accept that, but even if he did do that, he'd have to do it with a firm alliance with Russia behind them. So they'd have to say, all right, we're going to be part of the three-way group, so USA, Russia, and China, that then takes on the whole world. That's the only way that that works. Now, if he does that, USA will be evil. And they've been saying for years how bad Russia and China are, and they'd have to support both of them. That's the only way that that scenario works. Now, a lot of Americans would object to that in the strongest possible way because Americans hate both Russia and China. So if he were to do that, I think you would find there would be a civil war. There would be assassinations, coups, even if Trump himself wasn't assassinated, and you'd end up going in down the dictatorship route because I think that would be the only solution. We wouldn't be able to have a functional democracy once that decision is made, and I think you'd end up with a world war with USA on Russia and China's side, and there'd be no walking back from that. So a lot of people are afraid of that. Again, I don't think that is in line with how Trump has done things. Is it impossible? I'd say yes. I think in practical terms, there is no chance of this. Now, I know there's a lot of fear mongering and people saying, well, this is a possibility, but I don't think they've thought it through the whole way. Is it possible that, well, was it possible? If Trump was in power when Russia were going to invade Ukraine, what would he have done? And I think we know that what Barack Obama did in 2014 was just to stay out of it. Would Trump have stayed out of it? I don't think so. I think most likely he would have put American troops in Ukraine, staring down the Russians on the other side, daring them to invade, and also pointed their nuclear weapons at Russia. That's what I think Trump would have done. And I think the response to that is that there would have been a lot of yelling on both sides. Maybe a few people would have died, maybe 10 or 15. That would have been at the brink of global nuclear war. And then Russia would have backed down and we would have had an honest talk about why they were there, which would have involved the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk, and we would have got to that, and there would have been a binding referendum, and I think that you would have found that USA would have supported their independence and also would have supported Crimea officially becoming a part of Russia. There wouldn't have been a war. Now, that's what I believe most likely Donald Trump would have done. Now, obviously, Barack Obama would have stayed out of it because he did in 2014. So Biden, I think, made a decision I don't think any other president would have done. Now, I think if you had Hillary Clinton in charge, let's say that Hillary Clinton won in 2016 and was serving her second term, what would she have done if um, Russia were there 2020 about to go ahead with it? I think that she would have not allowed it. I think she would have been meeting with Russia and saying, hey guys, she would have had a three-way summit with Russia and Ukraine. And that's what I imagined because she was very meddling and she was involved in all the different things. She probably wouldn't have put American troops on there, wouldn't have threatened nuclear war, but she would have met with them. She might have put American troops. I don't think she would have threatened nuclear war. And she would have had a three-way summit where they talked it through and she said, no, Russia, you can't do that. And then secretly, under the table, they would have had a deal and said, all right, and probably the same result as Trump, but without the threats of nuclear war. Would have taken a bit longer, probably would have had a few more people died, but you would have had that same result. Obviously, with Barack Obama's version, people die, but it would have been like 10,000 or something, and it would have lasted a few weeks. And then Donetsk and Luhansk would have been officially, well, they would have been independent as far as Russia were concerned, and as far as Ukraine were concerned, but the rest of the world would have disagreed. That'd be the Barack Obama way. Now, there were other options, and other presidents and other leaders might have handled it differently. Kamala Harris, I think, would have said that she was going to handle it forcefully, but I think she ultimately would have done it the Barack Obama way of just staying out of it. She would have said a lot of nasty words, but I don't think she would have paid for the war in Ukraine. I don't think people would have supported it. And if she did do it, I think that they would have just stayed out of it. They would have, oh, look, they would have taken Ukrainian refugees, and they would have said how wrong it was and helped Ukraine to get that land back. But I don't think it would have been the situation that Joe Biden had. I think Joe Biden is unique in being the only president that I'm aware of that was any chance of doing this. I think even Bill Clinton, even under the Monica Lewinsky scandal, still wouldn't have done this. Maybe George W. Bush, or sorry, George H. Bush Sr. might have, but I think even then he probably wouldn't have done it this badly. I think probably George H. Bush would have funded Ukraine a lot more heavily so that Ukraine could actually beat Russia, meaning that Russia would nuke Ukraine. And we would have had a nuclear weapon fired into Ukraine pretty quickly. And I think then he would have backed down, and that would have been the end of the war. And I think it would have been a lot quicker under George H. Bush. Now, that sounds devastating. There would have been a nuclear weapon fired. And I think that's probably the worst after Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden's version is the worst. I think that's worse than this because the war's still continuing. So if you've got to consider that, I think any other president in charge, not just Trump, but anyone else could end this war and would end this war. So this is not just simply a Trump thing. Trump is going to take credit for it and he's going to say he's so amazing, he's the only one that could have done it. I think he would do it in a different way, but I think you'd find that just about any other president would have done it. The only other one that I think is a risk of not doing it is George H. Bush Sr. Um, so, of course, in my lifetime, he's the second worst president after Joe Biden. And I know you're saying, oh, but aren't you Republican? I'm not Republican. I'm not American. American presidents are all bad, as far as I'm concerned. I don't care which side of the fence they're on, they're bad. They're different degrees of bad. And George H. Bush, I consider to be one of the very worst in my lifetime, at least. Uh, and he was my very worst until Joe Biden came along. And I consider Joe Biden to be okay until this war, but probably the Afghanistan withdrawal as well. So, given this, I'm actually thinking that this probably won't happen for 3 to 6 months. Now, what will happen? Can he end it in 24 hours? Again, I think that what a lot of people are suggesting, that he just hands Ukraine to Russia, is not going to happen. I think even if USA withdrew, as in not well, they don't have any troops there, but if they withdrew all their funding, I think you'd find that the war would continue on for another 6 months or so. I think you'd find that a lot of European countries would up their investment. Might be Germany, might be UK. You'd probably find Trump would have to negotiate with UK and say, "Hey, stop funding them." But I think there would be a lot of fighting, and it would continue. And I think Russia would end up taking a lot more land before they finally allow Ukraine to surrender. They won't accept a surrender straight away. They will want the war to continue until they've got as much land as they want. Now, how much land do Russia want? I think that you'll find that they will take the eastern half. And by east, I don't literally mean split down the middle. It would actually be more southeast. So a bit further west in the southern part, not quite as far west on the northern part. So to be more diagonal because it's southwest, oh sorry, southeast versus northwest. So because Ukraine is clearly on the anti-Russia side, so yeah, Kiev is on the anti-Russia side, while Crimea is on the pro-Russia side, and you have a blast like Odessa, which are clearly on the Russian side, and it's not even quite even because then you got splinters of bits that there were maps of elections that they held before 2014, and you would see a clear geographic cut, a split. Ukraine is two countries. There's the Russian Ukraine and the Polish Ukraine. That's how a lot of people refer to it. And that's historically how it was for 1,000 years. So now it's not quite as even as that. But you've also got to realize that Poland lost territory to Russia, and that territory is now part of Ukraine, part of World War Two, which they won World War Two because Poland, people not aware, in World War Two, Russia started off on Germany's side and they split Poland in half. Germany took half and Russia took half. Now, when the war ended and Russia changed sides and went against Germany, Poland got the German half back, but they never got the Polish half back. Sorry, the Russian half back. And the Russian Poland, which became Polish Ukraine or Western Ukraine, was now part of Ukraine. So half of Ukraine really belongs to Poland historically. And in fact, there's no legal argument in which that should belong to Ukraine and not Poland. Now, the other half, there's really, that other half was always a part of Russia. So Ukraine should probably be split. Half of it should go to Poland and half should go to Russia. And if you actually ask people in Poland, a lot of them want to have large sections of Ukraine go back to them because it is their land, and they won the war. Poland were on the winning side, so why did they lose land? It's not a fair situation. It was pandering to the Soviet Union, and if you ask Russia, they would give that up. And when they're saying they give up Ukraine, that's what they meant. So anyway, so that's one thing, and I think you'll find that if they did withdraw, if Trump did withdraw funding, you'd have somewhere around 6 months of fighting extra. So probably towards the end of 2025, and then you'd find that Russian Ukraine, as I'm going to say, Russian Ukraine or Eastern Ukraine, will go to Russia, and then they'll stop. I don't think they'll take the whole of Ukraine because Polish Ukraine could never be held by Russia. So Western Ukraine would stay neutral, and Russia would then sue for peace and take half the country. The other half they'd leave alone. Now, if there'd be a question of whether they'd literally get every part that they want. There'd probably be a bit of negotiations and so forth, and the truce would be about how much that land they really need and so forth. And they might not end up with a full half, might not be much more land than they have control of at the moment. So that'd be what you'd have if USA decide to be neutral. So that it is a viable option. It's a weak option, and it doesn't end it in 24 hours. And I think that the problem is, I mean, if Kamala Harris were in charge and she did that, I think she'd have a mandate to do that. But Trump being in charge, he doesn't have that mandate because he made that promise to end it in 24 hours, and this does not end it in 24 hours. So he's not going to do that because he's going to look terrible. So he's not going to hand Ukraine to Russia because it'll lead to civil war and global World War III, and USA would have to be on Russia and China's side as part of that world war. They might win the war because they're the three most powerful countries in the world, but you'd have the whole of Europe would be against them. Even England would be against USA in such a scenario. They would not. UK would not side with USA in that scenario. I can't guarantee who would win that war. You'd have three countries that historically aren't friends on one side, but they are very powerful countries, so they might win, but they might not. It'd be a global war, and you'd have all these nukes and all these threats and all that. So that's not going to happen. And I think him just simply ending funding is not going to happen. So what is going to happen? And I think if you look at the start of the war and at least why Russia said they started the war, and again, they could be lying, but what they said, then you have an answer for what they actually want. And what they said was, so 2 weeks before they invaded, they said that Donetsk and Luhansk are independent and they recognize them as separate countries. Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, DPR and LPR, they're countries as far as Russia's concerned, as of 2 weeks before they invaded, and therefore they don't view it as an invasion. They view it as a liberation. They view it as assisting an ally. So they assisted DPR and LPR in stopping the Ukrainian invaders. So in their mind, Ukraine are the bad guys. Ukraine are invading. They're not respecting their sovereignty. So once you understand that, it makes more sense because Russians don't consider themselves to be the bad guys. They don't consider that they're just evil and all that. Now you might say, "Oh, that's a complete load of rubbish," but that's what they said. Now, in that respect, and let's imagine this hypothetical, if DPR and LPR were recognised worldwide as individual independent countries when the war began, the United Nations had supported them. Now, they were recognised as autonomous regions within Ukraine, but they were still recognised as a part of Ukraine. So this is similar to the Basque region of Spain, bordering Spain and France, who don't want to be in either country. But they're not independent, they're just autonomous. And there are autonomous regions all around the world. So they weren't independent, but they were autonomous. And they had been autonomous for 8 previous years since 2014. So if they'd been recognised as independent, this war would be very different to how it's perceived around the world. And I think that you'd find that a lot of people would say, hey, that part of things going into the Donbass is perfectly legitimate. I mean, Australia went to Papua New Guinea to protect Papua New Guinea from the Indonesians. We've done that a few times. Considered to be a good thing to do. The only part of it that is then a bit dubious is that Russia also went into Kiev. But they said they went into Kiev to sort of stop them from invading. It's still kind of justified. And so I think you'll find that if this region is considered to be independent or part of Russia, legally, this war takes a very different tone. So I think you'll find that part of the negotiations is that Russia want them to be recognised as independent. And also, of course, we know that later than that, towards the end of 2022, I think it was, Russia had all of these referendums for these other oblasts, and then afterwards they said, well, they all voted to become part of Russia. And then people say that's an illegal annexation. I don't think it's necessarily illegal. I don't think the verdict's out on that yet. It, certainly, if the world officially says no, they weren't legitimate, then it's illegal. Now, okay, Ukraine took it back, but then that could mean that Ukraine's invasion of these lands is illegal. They're invading sovereign nations, not returning their own oblast to themselves. So this is where it becomes a bit messy, and then we sort of get to the crux of what this war is about and what a solution would look like. So obviously, Trump could go and say, I recognise the neutrality of Donetsk and Luhansk, and I recognise that Crimea belongs to Russia. Now, if he does that, I think a lot of people will say, well, you're corrupt. And I don't think that's going to happen because he's all about election integrity and he couldn't have overseen those votes. So, and also, of course, going ahead, you're going further and saying, well, I recognise the integrity of the other referendums that they had. He can't do that either. I think that that would damage his reputation too much, and people just say you're corrupt, and it would damage his ability to lead USA. So I don't see that happening. But what he could do is he could have referendums that he oversees in these regions. That could be simply Donetsk and Luhansk. It could also be Crimea. Now, I don't think Russia's going to want Crimea to be involved in this because they're going to say, oh no, Crimea is part of Russia. That's non-negotiable. But I think if Trump also adds in the carrot of the other annexed regions, so Kharkiv and perhaps Odessa, some other places, and adds them in, and also has the carrot for um, Ukraine that they potentially might get Crimea back, then I think we've got a negotiation that works on both sides. And I think if you put a number of places on the chopping board, and maybe even some parts of Russia that are on the border, was it Rostov on Don or something? I can't remember what the name of it is. You could put a border oblast like that into the mix, and they're deciding whether they want to be part of Russia or Ukraine. And then, obviously, to do that, now Trump would be in the position where he can have an election integrity task force. Now, again, that would be a name, and that same group could then look at US elections later. Very smart to do that. And if he does that, he can enter in there. Now, obviously, Ukraine and Russia would also have their own officials to observe, and there would probably be neutral officials. United Nations would probably send people from China, France, United Kingdom, and maybe even a few other countries, and they'd all be observing and making sure it's fine. And then once it's done, whichever side wins, and you'd have to have a two-way ballot. You couldn't have multiple options. Just say you want to be in Ukraine or Russia, do that, and I think that would be binding. And I reckon you could get the basis of that deal worked out in 24 hours. Now, the complexity of it would probably take 6 months. Would you have a ceasefire? I reckon you'd be meeting. Let's say they meet, and I'm going to pick a date. Let's say March 24th. They meet on March 24th, March 25th, ceasefire. Now, it'd be a temporary ceasefire on the condition that this actually goes ahead, blah, blah, blah. But there'd be that ceasefire, and it'd probably be a 6 month ceasefire because they'd give themselves that timeline. And let's say September 25th or September 24th, whatever date it is, they're going to have that referendum and they're going to count it, make sure it's counted properly. They're going to give themselves 6 weeks. So, start of November next year, this time next year, you have a decision that's recognised by the international community as to which oblasts go where. And he might have some Russian oblasts on the chopping block. I think the individual details of that would be up to the debate, but I reckon you could absolutely do that in 24 hours, and I think it would be binding. And I think both sides would be like, well, we don't really want to fight. And now, how would you make sure it's fair? You'd have to have a group. Now, of course, after he does that, and this is the really smart thing about it, is that after Trump does this, he can then turn around and say, all right, I want to do the same thing with our own country. And that same election task force that's overseen this vote in Ukraine, or possibly Ukraine and Russia, could then go to USA and make sure that the whole of USA are on, they have election integrity and they all do it in the same way across the country and have fair elections. So I think it'd be a very smart way, both sides. Plus, of course, he'll say, oh, I'm the only person that could have done it, they all respect me, blah, blah, blah. And I think you'd find that him doing that, he'd say, well, he staved off World War Three, staved off a nuclear war, staved off a global nuclear war. And there'd be a degree of truth to it. So is this the only option that I think is open to him? And I think that the other option, the only other one that I can think of, is to do a similar thing, but with the whole of the United Nations. The problem with having the whole of the United Nations on board is that then it's a lot more difficult to organise because you're going to need France. France is not going to agree. UK might. China's going to go. "Mm." France is going to be your main sticking point, and they're not going to agree either way. They're going to just be like, no, 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 no. And even if they did agree, it'd take a long time, and have to be a lot of concessions and so forth. And I see France as being the big problem. I see China as being a problem too. And United Kingdom might be like, don't know about this. Um, so there'd be a lot easier to do it just as USA as the mediator, but it is more powerful to do it as United Nations. Now, when we do this, I don't expect that the whole world will instantly recognize them as being a part of Russia or moving or whatever. And I don't even think the United Nations will just straight away approve. I think there'll be a lot of time, even after the votes, be a lot of time devoted to trying to work it out. I think you'll find a number of countries will agree with it. I think United Kingdom will agree. I think you'll find that obviously all the Russian friendly countries will agree, all the BRICS countries, all the CIS or whatever they're called. And I think China will agree eventually, though not perhaps not straight away. And I think United Kingdom will agree. Australia obviously will get on board. Canada, New Zealand, and there'll be a few little smatterings, but I think some countries will disagree, and I expect Germany to disagree. France will disagree, and then there'll be more than that, but I don't know who. Um, not exactly. I'm not sure which way India and Pakistan will go. They might agree or disagree, but I think a lot of countries will wait and they'll say, "Look, we'll see how fair that election is." And if that election comes across and people think it's not fair, don't think they'll be able to have another one because they already had one before this, so this will already be the second. So that'll be the end of it. And if it's not agreed, I think the fighting will resume. And I think even if it is agreed, the fighting will resume. And I don't think this will be an end to all fighting, but I think it will simmer it a bit. It'll slow it down. It'll mean that we're not in imminent danger of an instant World War Three or nuclear war. And I still think the war will continue for another 2 or 3 years in some fashion afterwards. And Ukraine will probably try to take back some of their oblasts that they lost by election. And Russia might try to take some of the places that they lost by election. And you might find that there'll have to be other negotiations about that, and maybe they'll go against the election and they'll trade one oblast for another and so forth. And so I think that the details of it will need some fleshing out, but the basics of it, I think, are pretty obvious. Now, is this what Trump's going to do? I can't guarantee it. He might not be that smart. I think that the thing is that I think most world leaders are aware that this is the right option. I think they're always aware. Now, they say something to the media, for the population, all that sort of thing, but what they really think is that there shouldn't be this war. And I've also said how this ties in with the tariffs. I think that you'll find that instead of having sanctions against Russia, there'll be tariffs against Russia. And there'll also be tariffs against China. And USA will lessen the amount that they trade with Russia and China, or at least lessen the amount that they import from those two countries. They'll be happy to export it, then they get money. So there'll be a reopening of all the American businesses in Russia, but there won't be Russian goods in the USA, or not very many of them. And that'll be, well, that'll be very expensive. That'll be what'll happen because it puts the price up. The Russian vodka, nope, you'll be getting it from Belgium from now on. Won't be the same, or Polish vodka maybe, and so forth. So yeah, look, I'm optimistic about this, and maybe I'm wrong. I think the 24 hours thing, he'll try his best to do it, but I don't think it'll be on the first day. It might be. If somebody reminds me and said, "Hey, you said that you do this on the first day," I said, "No, I said to do it in 24 hours." I didn't say it'd be which 24 hours. You know, the traditional political sliminess. But I think that then there will be pressure, and he'll do it. I reckon by March. I reckon by the end of March this will happen. I might be wrong, but I've got a feeling that's sort of our timetable, and I think it will kind of be focused on other things, and then you'll have Ukraine going, "Hang on, we want this to end. No, we don't want to lose all of our sovereignty." And Russia will go, "You've got to end this, or else." And then they'll have a meeting, and yeah, I reckon, yeah, that, I'm just going to say March 24th, March 25th sound like good dates to me. I don't know why I'm picking those dates. I just am. Look at my calendar. What day of the week are they? March 24th is a Monday. March 25th is a Tuesday. Is that Easter? They haven't even checked. Anyway, it might not be those days. It might be completely different. But, we also have to note that Russia and Ukraine are very religious. They're very Christian, but they're Orthodox Christian. Well, I think Ukraine's a bit different now. But focusing it on Easter might be a good option. Might actually do well in both countries. And, I think that, yeah, I think that there is a way forward for this. And I think that people who are like, oh, no, we don't want Ukraine to fall. Aren't you guys anti-war? Aren't you guys against war and bloodshed and people dying meaninglessly? I mean, this war was pointless. There was really no value to it. It's just that the way Joe Biden set it up, Ukraine thought that if they didn't fight it, they would cease to exist as a country, not just individuals, but the entire country. And Russia felt that if they didn't fight it, they would cease to exist as a country. And this is Joe Biden's war. Um, I mean, people say, no, I have nothing to do with it. I think without his involvement, if he'd done a Barack Obama, it's a 3 week war. Yeah, sure, maybe 10,000 people died. We'd say, oh, that's terrible, devastating. You've killed 10,000 people by not getting involved. But you look at the alternative, 500,000 in 2 years, or 2.5 years, 3 years almost. It's, yeah, this is a legacy that I think when we look back, we'll be saying this is what made Joe Biden a bad president. This was his problem. And I think all those people saying he was a good president, historically, I don't think he'll be viewed as a good president. I think he'll be viewed as one of the worst. Maybe not the absolute worst. I don't. really know, the ones that were presiding before I was born or before I got to a certain age. I mean, the first one that I was really aware of was Ronald Reagan. So for me, it's Reagan and after Reagan that I'm viewing, and in that group, Joe Biden is the worst. And is Donald Trump the best? I think Ronald Reagan was, to be honest, in terms of an objective world group. Ronald Reagan was probably the best, but Donald Trump's probably the second best. And look, if he has a good term, I think that Donald Trump could end up being the best in that time frame at least. Now, that's not to say that he was better than Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or JFK or any of the other ones people view really highly, but who knows? He might be at least above Reagan, and I think at the moment he's quite a long way behind Reagan. But in world terms, and I'm not talking about how good he is for USA. How good he is for USA is probably a bit lower than that. But in terms of how good they are for Australia, I'm in Australia. Trump is right now the second best behind Reagan, or we can say the best since Reagan, and that's on his first term. How well his second term goes, a lot will depend on how well he handles this. If he completely messes it up, and I think the worst version of this is if he gives the whole of Ukraine to Russia, I'll probably put him below Biden as the worst. But if he does the best version, which is the one I just suggested of the votes, I think he'll probably surpass Reagan as the best in my lifetime. So, you know, that's it. Yeah, anyway, that's all I have to talk about today. Bye bye now.